wonderful things happen just on the other side of our ego, and beautiful things happen right on the edge of comfort. So we define possibility leadership as setting the conditions for yourself and others to stretch what's comfortable into what's possible.
Welcome to the Next Insights podcast, intersecting science, technology, and consciousness. I'm your host, Michael Morrissey, strategic futurist and founder of Next Collabs. This podcast explores the transformative potential of generative AI and its many applications for personal, professional, and business growth. Join us where we celebrate the next insights, those aha moments that shift your point of view and open the door into the next paradigm. You'll hear the latest ideas and thought-provoking conversations with industry experts, authors, thought leaders, equipping you with the strategies to harness the relentless pace of change in the AI era. Whether you're a CEO, leader, or interested in personal growth, this podcast will give you the insights to leverage AI to amplify human potential and consciously shape the future for humanity first. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of the Next Insights podcast. Today, I'm excited to have Crystal Fernando, founder of Whatbox Innovation Partners, on the show. We met through Dr. Evian Gordon, and they've been collaborators for several years, layering in brain science with Crystal's work on possibility thinking. We hosted a panel discussion at the Next Collective recently on Your Brain on AI, Innovation and Possibility Thinking in Q1 2024. It was a really great session, and so excited to have Crystal here on the show to talk more about that and things related to the theme for the show, the science of possibility thinking. And so I've kind of created a roadmap, Crystal, for the show that would start with this statement: possibility thinking and thinking well as the new performance imperative. I think that's really a powerful statement in this era of continuous change and VUCA. And you can tell us more about that. And then layering in your work with Evian and the brain as the OS, or the operating system, understanding the brain and how it works, to ground truth the work related to possibility thinking. And finally, activating possibility thinking at scale for leadership, corporate culture, and ultimately innovation. So welcome to the show. So excited to have you here. You and I have had many conversations before this session that just could keep on going. And so I think this is just a natural extension of the intersectionality between us.
Thank you, Michael. I'm excited. I'm excited to be here. This is my best meeting of the day, and I'm excited to see where we go with it. So thank you. I'm honored to be here with you and to be here in front of your audience. It's been a great journey. We haven't known each other long, but it's been a fast friendship, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider this is only March, it's probably we've only known each other for like 6 weeks. But I think you said this when I saw there was an interview with you and Evian, which I highly recommend, and we'll put that in the show notes. Both of you had the same kind of sense that you've known him forever. When you started working with him, I think it was during COVID several years ago. So I created a scaffold or framework for the podcast because I think in your 10 principles to thrive, one of them was to offer guardrails for exploration. So I created a framework, and I know you love questions. You shared that with me, and a book that you can also talk about that we're going to do in the Next Collective for sure. We're going to do a couple of weeks on just asking good questions. So I created 4 questions to guide the conversation. So one is, who is Crystal Fernando and what is Whatbox? Number 2, what is possibility thinking? Number 3, what is possibility leadership? And finally, kind of bring it all home, how does possibility thinking and possibility leadership scale to foster an innovational culture and create new value for stakeholders at the corporate level? So let's start with, who is Crystal Fernando and what is Whatbox?
Gosh, when you said that first, I was like, I think I know the answer to all of them except for the first one, maybe. Still trying to figure that out, Michael. Who am I and what am I about? So I'll start just by saying I am a leadership executive coach and strategist. I spent a number of years in the startup world and technology, and then a good 15 years in executive corporate world and hospitality and strategy. And then over the last 7 years, have been working with Wetbox, which is a bit of an adventure and journey, which I think is more passion-led and kind of what brought me to you. So the first one is I'm probably someone who's taken a nonlinear journey, who follows my heart and follows my curiosity, and it has led me to wonderful places, including here today. Wetbox is an adventure that I started early on as just a personal plight to understand leadership in this cross section of innovation and leadership, and what really makes when I looked back at my career, for whatever reason, I don't even know, sometimes it's luck, but the continuity was to create teams where exciting things happened. Ideas came to market. We were not only able to be creative, but able to get things to market in an effective and valuable way. And I kind of looked back at that and thought, well, how do I do that? How do I teach others to do that? What does that look like? And so Wetbox came as a collaborative of very diverse by design experts in strategy, design, art, engineering, and also leadership and behavioral science. And then we met Evian at a program through Emory University, and it just struck me that he was an artist and a neuroscientist. And so I'm like, I got to get to know this guy. So through some conversations around art and the brain, we struck up a conversation, which led to a collaboration, which led to some deep work that he's influenced so much. So much of the work that we do has been so positively influenced by his depth of neuroscience applied to, I guess, what you would call the practical world that I live in. And like, well, that's wonderful. Brain, what do I do with that information now? How do we move from knowing to doing? So we as a company are an agency that focuses on building mindsets and skills to thrive in an ever-changing landscape. And so that comes in the form of three things. We do strategy on purpose, we often call it, which is purpose-led strategy and helping leaders tell their story about the impact they're trying to make, but not just their story, personal, their actual strategy, and connecting the personalization of the difference they're looking to make in the world with the strategy, the actual market differentiator. Again, very pragmatic. The second thing we do, we call possibility leadership, which I think was going to be one of your third question. I think that was so we'll get there, which is really helping leaders take the roads less traveled and helping them build the skill sets and mindsets to lead through ambiguity in a constantly changing landscape. And then the third is culture, which I think is your fourth question. So I think we're going to get all around the what is Wetbox. I hope that answers for now. Does that answer your question, Michael?
Yeah, it does. I mean, there's a really, sort of foundational idea where you and Evian like come together and say, this is the very first principle. And I probably could leave a pregnant space here and you can fill it, but I'll put it in there. Safety first sort of precedes everything. Tell us more about that. That's like the doorway or the gateway to possibility thinking, safety.
So I guess it would probably help if I pause and define possibility thinking. And then the first rule to play, I guess you would say, is safety first. We talk about possibility thinking and possibility leadership with a bit of a differentiation, but possibility thinking is a brain state. It's a state by which we are safe, calm, and flexible, thereby open to explore. Some might call it the flexible mindset, the explore mindset, or mind state, which is slightly different. We say it's the ability to create new choices and make new choices. That just precludes there's insight in there somewhere, there's new connections in there, but then there also has to be enough harmonization, which we'll get to, of our intuition, our rational way to turn that into action and bring it into the world. And so it's an open, optimistic, exploratory space. It's where we access insight, creativity, and innovative problem solving. We have breakthrough ideas. Not just breakthrough ideas, we used to call it innovation thinking, right? But it's not just about products and services. For us, it's about new awareness. It might just be awareness of a pattern, of a really well-worn pattern that you've had as a leader that maybe we didn't have awareness of. So in this brain state, especially during coaching, this is the spot where you can go, oh, right, I can be open to seeing that pattern and I can begin to make choices, new choices that will help me break that pattern. So it goes from individual all the way up to enterprise. And it's also the ability to hold multiple truths in that space, which is hard to do if you don't have safety. So getting back to your question around why safety first? Safety is really defined, let's just go psychological safety. But in the brain state, it's really your safe, calm, and open state of mind, which means that you are then able to access the information in your intuition, and you're able to access new ideas and insight and awareness that you would not actually be able to access So sometimes we'll say it's permission to play, right? The safety first is the number one organizing principle of the brain. I think we kind of all know that intellectually. You hear it all about we're triggered or fight or flight, or it's our lizard brain. You hear a lot of those statements, but ultimately what it means is if you aren't in a safe, calm, and flexible brain state, and you're expecting anything other than binary thinking, black and white, my way or the highway, if you're expecting insight in that, you're wasting your energy. So we start there just by saying it's the governing rule of the brain. And you have to honor that for yourself. And you have to honor that when you're interacting situationally with others. And you have to honor that at scale from a cultural point of view. So if we see that there isn't psychological safety because of high stress levels or toxicity in the group or anything like that, we would not advance to trying to create new ways of working or anything like that. You kind of pause and address that. Even as a personal, like if I get a coaching client that comes into a session and they're triggered, whatever agenda I had's out the window. Does that make sense? Until which point we can establish or reestablish the right brain state to do the work that we need. So it's important, incredibly important. And I think we all know it to some degree and somewhat intuitively, but it's not something we use and apply in ways that are practical, in my opinion, and not as much as we should anyway.
Yeah, we tend to, when we're triggered, if anything, we just kind of continue and ignore the signals and the dashboard. And I guess this, to kind of zoom out, how do you approach that if I'm an executive? What I find so interesting about your work is, and so courageous in a sense, is to bring kind of intuition and sort of innovational thinking to the C-suite and, find a way to unlock a conditioned position where you've got that monkey mind, or you're just surrounded with sort of to-dos, and you don't have a way to unlock yourself from those conditions and see a bigger picture. So how do you, I think you talk about this idea of you create agency in the moment and in the long run. And how do you go out doing that? What is your strategy?
Thank you for asking. I want to acknowledge really quickly what you were implying before I give you, here's our way of doing that. I just want to acknowledge the point that you made. It's really important. And we focus on the C-suite and executives and leaders who are in high stake, stressful situations. And then I wouldn't say that that's unique to them. I just think it's probably a little more elevated, that the high stakes and the pressure of things, right? And the amount of things and on their plate. And when you really stop long enough to understand how our brain works and that there are really organizing principles of all human brains, and while the world's radically shifting around us, and it can feel like you're out of control sometimes, right? Or it can feel like you are just reacting to the world around you constantly, when there are enduring truths that when you understand them, sometimes we use the word micro agency. I just want to give you little pieces of agency that you have, power that you have when you understand these things, to stop. And we do that in two different. So first we say your brain's an operating system. And if you understand the operating system, there are things that are universal to all brains that would be wonderful if you understand. When I'm interacting with you and you're hijacked, but I'm not, how do I handle that? What if I'm hijacked and you're hijacked too? How do we handle that? And yet there are these, like safety, for example, is a universal principle. We are all governed by that principle. And then there are things that are more nuanced and personal. So our own patterns, our own experiences. And so understanding both the system, the operating system, which is your brain, and understanding your patterns and understanding your nuances, and we call it your formula for success, right? These are the things I know are my triggers. These are the things I know help me. And so once we can get beyond the mechanics, we then say, if you've got this operating system, you want performance, you need a strategy. The world is not necessarily working for your brain at all. Right? From constantly being on and having your cognition in demand all the time, to being in high stakes environments, to being in stressful situations, being in every way you can almost think about it, the world is working against our best thinking. So the first thing we like to do is just go, let's look at in the moment, and then we build up to in the long run. So in the moment, how do you understand the one micro agency thing that we used to, that we kind of want? First, let me go in this first piece where you're like, here's how your brain works and they're enduring truths. There's a little micro agency in that, right? Just understanding that these are the truths of how that govern our system, and there's a little bit of agency there. The second thing is when we get into the moment, we talk about priming and the brain-body connection. And while we talk about breathing and various other things, sometimes we'll start with breathing just because it's universal and it is very brain body. But there's so many other things that are really, whether that's a smell, whether that's a symbol, whether that's music, there's so many sensory ways that you can prime your system for possibility thinking or change your brain state. And so helping people understand that there's a mechanic there that we do have agency over. And we often don't think like that. We think, oh my goodness, I'm reacting to the day. And so I one, need to understand my system and how it interacts with this environment that I'm in. And two, in any moment, whether it's reactive or proactive, if I'm reacting to a situation, I can use my breathing, even without anyone knowing, right? I can be in a meeting. And if I'm finding myself elevated, I'm finding my breath shallow, I can use that brain-body connection by helping people understand kind of heart rate variability and the fact that you have the ability and the agency to regain control of this set operating system. Proactively, you also have the ability to set your brain state before you walk into a high-stake environment. And also knowing that you prime, especially as a leader, especially as an executive leader, you bring the weather. You bring the climate for that meeting and people will mirror you. So if you come in half elevated or you come in late and kind of then that really sets the weather for the entire meeting. And so understanding proactively how you do that, proactively how you use humor and other ways to set the stage, even if it's non-conscious, for good things to happen is really important. And there's a lot of agency in that. And then in the long run, we start making choices, which we tend to focus on. There are many ways, but tend to focus on mindset and habit, understanding how to reframe and rewire narrative and stories and mindsets that are simplifying systems that make sense of our reality. I think that was a Leah Crum that I'm citing, but I always liked your definition of like, these are simplifying systems that make sense of our radically complex reality. And we all have them. So understanding what they are and if they're helpful or harmful, and then being able to proactively build capacity or broaden our aperture for how we think in the long run allows us to be able to come to the table with more of a, sometimes we'll say player versus victim mindset, right? We're here at the table because we're players in this world, whether the world is changing. I don't make the rules, but I know how to play by those rules. And then the second one is habit, that you have to be able to build muscle memory or just the actual habits, whether they're how you manage your cognition, how you manage your energy, or how you make decisions, or how you have time to think during the day, which is another one of our guiding principles. It's just space to think in a world that is constantly on. So to simplify that or to recap that, Michael, it's really the first piece of micro agencies, understanding you have a system and it works a certain way. And the agency of just knowing that is huge. And then understanding your own nuances and programming, also huge. And then as we move into the moment, understanding in that moment, what you have control over is a lot of agency. And then in the long run, understanding that your brain actually is like a muscle and we need to exercise those things. So when you need access to possibility thinking, you can get there a lot quicker with the ability and access over time with mindsets and habits.
I mean, I would think the neuroscience and the science really grounds this, the potential of possibility thinking as a kind of primary first principle, a priori ground truth. Okay, so you have that. And I think for C-suite, they would probably resonate with that. Like you're giving me the facts, you're giving me the data. Now, just to, tip the hat to Evian, he talks about conscious, non-conscious, and that it's all an inside job. And then that segues to you and you say possibility is sort of inside out. Maybe you could just expand on that, because I think that's a really powerful bridge between you and Evian.
Absolutely. And 100%. What's interesting is I spent so many years doing leadership and innovation, and I was doing a lot of these things, but it wasn't until I met Evian that we really grounded and rooted them. And as we were doing that, we were really focused on innovation, because there was this interesting segue between creativity and innovation and his work in brain science. And then COVID came and we realized obviously his interaction with the wellness world as well, watching kind of health and wellness and anxiety rise and focus drop and all of these different statistics and things you look at. And what was interesting to me as we began to explore this idea of it may not just be about innovation. It might be about helping people, whether they're leaders or not, understand the mechanics of these enduring truths. And as a mom, even I want to understand this wild world that we're parenting in and teaching in. And it just is so broad. the ability to respond to a world that sometimes feels like it's moving faster than we can handle.
Seems like it's just accelerating. I mean, also VUCA. I mean, what do you mean by VUCA?
Oh, so VUCA is a terminology which I did not. It's been around for a while. It actually came from the military, I understand. And it was really this term of volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous terrain. And it was really when you're sending people into combat zone where like that they required new mindsets and new skill sets when those four things were present. And in the last, I would say 10 years, you've started to see that in the leadership landscape, and it's talked about quite a bit. And it's for those of us in the leadership space, we're like, oh my gosh, I hear that another time. But then there are other people who are like, I didn't know. And so when you talk to leaders, I will often ask them, do you ever feel like in your generation, and I feel like this, in my generation, if I think back to my early leadership, when it was really about having the answer and really about expertise, and I was Six Sigma trained in project management, it was very much about finding the defects. And then software development life cycles came on to the scene. And then it was about finding, yes, one defect can lead to multiple things and high level of expertise, but there was still a relatively high degree of confidence and ability to resolve those things. And then complexity came and then globalization came and now AI is on the scene. And it almost feels to leaders and others like you were picked up off one game board and dropped on another and no one told you. And by the way, this game board over here has different rules and no one's told you that. So you're still doing the same things you did on this, playing this other game, and they're not working anymore. Right. And you're tired. As you're beginning to say this narrative, you start getting people going, oh my gosh, that's exactly how I feel. But without fully understanding the context by which they're operating. So sometimes just slowing down enough to go, did you know that this is a word? This is a term. And some people go, yes. And some people are like, no, I didn't. And you're like, the fact that there's a term for this, don't you think that's really interesting? And then the shift of, like I think with Nextco Book Club, we shared some of the World Economic Forum stats and some of just the macro scene and like, what are the skills people are looking for right now? And on the top of that is creativity, adaptability, resilience, things that haven't been on the list before. And there's reasons for that. Part of that is just reassuring that they're not crazy. Does that make sense? They're playing this game and their heads down trying to get stuff done and it's not working the way it used to and it's super stressful. And if you just pull out of that long enough to go, there's a reason that you're feeling that way. And actually, it's not bad news. There's some real enduring truths. I'm not telling you have to memorize a new algorithm. You really just have to read and being human, which, by the way, you know how to do because you are human. Right? It's almost a return to who we are.
I mean, it's powerful to be able to label something is power, right? To call it VUCA. And then also, I think what really struck me, even in this interaction, is the notion that it's like the battlefield now has become the C-suite and within the organization. It's a battlefield. In a sense, you made that segue, and I think that really resonates. And then, the next thing, that would just, if I was the executive, I'd go, thank you. Like you actually just identified my world. It's a battlefield and I'm overwhelmed. One of the touch points for me is Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow and the sort of, when you get into overwhelm, pretty much you're not going to get into flow. You are just in struggle phase continuously. So it's like how to become aware when you're not in flow or when you're, 4% more than you can handle. How can you offload it or how can you pull back? And even how can you sort of become aware that I'm in overwhelm and I need to pull back and then find a way to go back to that 4% increment. You were talking about micro agency. I think that kind of resonates too with that idea of 4%.
Absolutely. The idea that you may not even know you're in overwhelm or give yourself permission to say, yes, I am, but I didn't know why. And also in our work, I felt really respect. Like I said, we took this right turn a few years ago, about 6 years ago. We were like, well, this is really like deep diving into the neuroscience of performance because one, there was a need. And two, I felt the need to give people an answer to that question, right? Of like, not just telling them, gosh, guess what? You're on a new game board. And I don't know. I don't make the rules, but good luck. I felt the need to go and here are the new rules or here's the new governing principles. And it is not that hard. It does not need to feel like a battlefield. There's a great, I think at one point, one of our things is a squiggly line and you're all entangled in this squiggly line. And by the time you get untangled, these same three lines, which look like a big hairball, can feel like this rhythmic flow and nothing has changed. It's the same three lines. It's just that our relationship with said situation has changed. And again, where mindset comes in, what are you telling yourself? Are you telling yourself you should have the answer? Are you telling yourself you should know all of these things? Nobody knows AI. It just came on the scene. It's not, no one's an expert in this space at this point in time. So why do you feel the burden of being that expert? And so that's where questions come in, Michael. It's like, well, let's take all of that energy and shift it from having to figure it out and entangle yourself in it, which is asking better questions. And maybe that's the new skill set of a leader. Maybe it's creating climate for everyone to participate in solving these pretty wicked problems. Is that the new, what does the new hero of a leader look like? But the legacy hero had the answer, worked really hard, delegated certain things. Like there's a legacy hero that we're trying to reframe. And even that, I feel like, gives people agency of like, it doesn't have to be that hard. It's just that we're playing by the wrong rules. Do you know what I mean? With the wrong tools and the wrong things. They don't work in this new system. So even understanding that.
I mean, this is, concurrent with Brené Brown's work for the last decade or more on vulnerability and, bringing that into the conventional, workplace. She's done a lot of the groundwork. And then I think your ideas around establishing kind of the capacity to be reflective, to tune in, to, as you suggest, stop. And then I love the visual metaphor of sort of entanglement. All these lines. I saw your diagram. I love that diagram where everything's tangled. And then there's that intermediate kind of moment where you install that sort of awareness or the witness consciousness, or to step back, zoom out and see a bigger picture. And then through that, being able to then harmonize and find alignment. And then everything starts to kind of get focused and all has the kind of the correct direction. So you've gone from sort of chaos, overwhelm to, oh, I'm in harmony, I'm in flow. So tell us about that midpoint. That I think that's where a lot of your work occurs, is that midpoint, how to expand that. And what are some of the practices that you're working with there?
Absolutely. And I also want to step back and just give, you were mentioning the non-conscious and the conscious with Evian's work, because I think what you're asking is square in the middle of that. Being able to raise, so safety first. We kind of sometimes we'll talk about a 3-part system. 1 is your safety first of your operating system and understanding that governing principle. 2 is that you have these 2 modes of thinking, your intuition and your executive. And that this is where Daniel Kahneman's work of system 1 and system 2. And we absolutely honor that same principle and just help people understand that there are 2 modes and that it's not one or the other, but it's a harmonization of both. And sometimes we'll think of creativity as being one and not the other, but it's actually, as you mentioned earlier, finding the useful step forward, putting that into action, and then coming back around and having space to think about what happened. So in this new world, it isn't about finding the answer. It's about spinning up maybe 2 or 3 experiments and being really clear about maybe failing on purpose so that you can learn something specific about the system in which you're operating. And then you need the space to think to bring that back into your operating system. So we often talk about harmonizing your intuitive and your rational or system 1 and system 2 thinking. What is interesting about that from an executive point of view is that we tend to, myself included, we tend to like wake up, get on our email, jump right into our executive mode and begin to work our way reacting to and responding to the day, where we need new direction, but our instinct and almost what we're rewarded for is responding and kind of living in that executive mode. So the moment you can pause and create space to think, you're actually going to get more quality dividends. However, cannot tell you how many leaders feel like they don't have permission to do that. And the narrative starts maybe from a victim standpoint where I can't do that. I've got so many meetings, and we start to unpack. So you're asking, what do we do? Let's unpack that. And what are you trying to tell yourself? And the very first thing we try to install is the habit of reflection. Because and then you can add priming to that. But once you have a small space, and it could look like just 3 minutes a day, that small space and you make a habit of that, you then feel the dividend of that time invested. And it's almost like, when you start working out and you're like, I go through that first phase and then you're like, oh, but now I really am craving it. And that's kind of what we're after. And then you can build and stack onto and anchor onto that and elaborate onto that. What's interesting is a lot of people come back and they say one of 2 things. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I haven't been doing that. I've seen the light, right? And I want to build on this and I'm totally committed. Or that felt wildly uncomfortable. And I was halfway through it before I picked up my phone or I started folding laundry or XYZ. And then we have a conversation around the fact that just because our well-worn habits are well-worn does not make them helpful. So it was wildly uncomfortable because you've not been doing that for years. And so to create that space feels really uncomfortable. But if you didn't know the science behind it, one might think, oh, I can't do that and move on. Does that make sense? And so sometimes you'd be surprised how much work is involved in just creating a new space. Sometimes you call it a third space, right? Like there has to be a third space that you occupy that allows you to adapt. And if the world's adapting, then you need to adapt with it. And that doesn't happen. It does happen naturally, but it's not going to happen naturally in a good way. So if you want agency in this world, right, you're going to adapt in a better way if you create the space to do it intentionally rather than reacting to all of these things. So
one of the thoughts that comes up for me is intuition starts with in. So, it's not extuition. So, for the most part, we're super identified with the outer world and we say that's reality. And I think the work that you're doing with Evian kind of goes, hold on, it's an inside job. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, and I'm the leader. And actually, it has to start from the inside and then out, because everything I do influences the network effect of my corporation and everything we do. So this is why I think for leaders, this is so powerful, this work, to kind of, in a sense, wake up, using Sam Harris's term. And in a sense, you're helping leaders to kind of wake up to another dimension that was always there, but we just haven't, as you say, I think you've mentioned this several times, haven't been given permission to go there. And so once you go there, I think you also make an important anchoring to our physicality. We know if we work out, it's a muscle and you can build it. And the same is true with your inner world and intuition. And then the other thought I had is relative to this idea of kind of a binary. It's this or that. I'm just fully external and that's reality. It's more like converge, diverge. And that's what opens the door to, innovational thinking and creativity. So
absolutely. Oh gosh. Well, there's so much there that I definitely relate to the divergent, convergent, double diamond, the innovation. But what that does is exactly what we're talking about from a rhythm point of view. It's like you're going inside, you're coming back outside, you're going inside, and you're adapting with various levels of understanding, but you're also kind of just signing up for the fact that it's a journey and that it isn't there final destination here. We're just going to walk our way through this and we're going to be okay with it. That in and of itself is pretty liberating when you're like, I'm not actually trying to find like one final perfect answer here. It's interesting. And I love what came up for me as you were talking about that is we have 5 to thrive mindsets. And the first one is the flexible mindset because it's really the permission to play. And from that, we call it the base camp. And the very next stop on our mindset kind of framework is human-centered. So we then use it. And when underneath each one of these, we kind of have 3 layers and they all start with self and then situational and then kind of leadership. And so for this, the human-centered piece, we will call it attunement. So are you attuned to your own value narrative? And if you're triggered, do you know what value is at assault here? Like what got you all worked up? Because usually it's something that you believed in that has been not assaulted, but like there's something that you believed there that or a mismatch of their expectations or something. But if you can attune first inward and understand what your value is, and then the very next step is to attune outward. And so do I understand your values, Michael? And do I understand myself well enough to know, and I'm coming to the table in a safe, calm, flexible mindset. And I also am able to name my value. And then the next step on the mindset piece is getting really curious. Because I can only really do that if I either know your value and I'm asking you questions around what does that mean to you? How does that work? Where did you come? Or I don't know your value. Thereby, I can get curious and ask you questions around why does this matter to you? I noticed that you were excited about that. Where did that come from for you? I'm not even noticing those cues if I'm still entangled inside myself. It allows me to attune outward. And then I can get curious. And then I can actually ask really great questions, really powerful questions that observe the situation or the moment and pick up on things that are not even verbal sometimes. Like I noticed that seemed really heavy for you. What was that about? And then the next stop. So we have flexibility, human-centered narratives, curiosity. And then the next one is then zoom out. You mentioned zoom in, zoom out. Then zoom out and look at the entire system for whatever problem you're entangled in. What were the contributing factors to those values? What was at play? What are they incentivized by? I was coaching two different leaders in the same team who had a conflict, but they were actually both incentivized to do exactly what they were doing. The system had incentivized them to be in conflict and tension with one another, right? So then you have to go, well, what is that about? And where did that come from? And have you talked about that? And so there's all these other, maybe it's cultural factors, maybe it's, whatever it is, what else is connected to this situation that's influencing it that is outside of our obvious remit? And then the very last one's experimentation. What can we do? What can I do? What is the one thing I need to learn? And that's where your agency rests. So sometimes we'll just have people walk, we call it walk the wheel, walk the mindsets and ask questions around those territories. And typically you can find your way forward. And that rhythm of doing that throughout the hairball, right, eventually leads you out to something that feels good to all, if that makes sense. Not perfect.
Sounds like, that's how you disentangle yourself in a sense, right?
Absolutely.
Hello, book enthusiasts, knowledge seekers, and lifelong learners. If you're passionate about diving deep into the realms of technology, science, and consciousness, then consider joining us in our Book Flow membership. In our unique community, we don't just read books, we immerse ourselves in them. Every week, we come together to dissect and absorb the groundbreaking ideas and content that shapes our world. And the best part, we often have authors themselves join us for riveting discussions. Previous guest authors include Gary Bowles, Scott Barry Kaufman, Stephen Kotler, Salim Ismail, Charlene Lee, Byron Reese, Franz Johansson, and many others. Join us for thought-provoking conversations with members from diverse backgrounds, each bringing their unique perspective to enrich our discussions. Visit our website in the show notes and sign up today and use the promo code to get 50% off your first month. Don't miss out on this opportunity. I look forward to seeing you in our autotelic community. Now, you say our mindsets define our comfort zone. And obviously we've got Dweck's work on fixing, you call it a flexible mindset. So in a sense, that's an update. Maybe you just give us a little nuance on your update.
Oh gosh, so let's just say I very much honor the work of Carol Dweck. And you mentioned we stand on the shoulders of giants, and these are really wonderful bodies of work. So it wasn't that we were redefining it. It was really, and I think Carol Dweck even calls it flexible mindset in a lot of her work rather than growth mindset, which I think has become more popularized. But when we define it, we do define it as this safe, calm, flexible brain state. But as a mindset, which is different than your mind state, it really is this belief that you can learn through anything, that it is okay not to have the answer, very much aligned. We do incorporate stress as enhancing mindset as well, which I think is a really nice complement to Carol Dweck's work. And so beginning this journey with an explorer, flexible, belief that it's okay that it's a little bit of tension we're about to go through. It's okay that this is going to be a journey. And I know that whatever comes out of the backside of this, I'm able to learn through it. That's a great starting point. So we kind of combine the mindset and mind state, right? Like, where am I right now in this very moment? And am I ready for this journey with my state of mind? Because I can have a growth mindset, but be totally triggered. Do you know what I mean? In this very state of mind. And so it's a little bit of a combination of those two. We help people understand, where are you right this second, Michael? Are you safe, calm, flexible? Are you ready for the journey? If you're not, then go get ready or get curious with yourself as to what's going on. And then the more you take this journey, the more we're wiring. And I actually think it was Aaliyah Crum who said, how do you create a mindset? It's habit that creates a mindset. So I honor the work of Carol Dweck and all of the growth mindset literature. And then we just add the application, because it's not enough to talk about it, right? It's not enough to, which I see too much in corporate, right? We're going to create a campaign and talk about growth mindset. And I think there is something, and there's still goodness. I think a lot of the research, so yeah, it's good to know about it. And even just knowing the research is great. If we can give people an application framework and something that creates a go-to habit of like, walk the wheel. If you have a problem, go back here and here's your go-to kind of framework. It really just reinforces and deepens it and wires it. So it's not I don't think it's an update or an and/or. I think it's just an elaboration of that.
So I love that distinction, the state. So you check in on your state, and then you've got the mindset, and that there is talking with Charlene Lee in a previous podcast, one of our colleagues and partners at Next Collabs, she does 3 things a day that are very uncomfortable as a practice. And to me, that is part of maintaining a kind of growth mindset, a flexible mindset, because you have to pass through discomfort to develop muscle, right? So I think that's another powerful practice. Like if we layer these in, and I think you talk about stacking, right? Some of these practices are breath work, meditation in some small way, to be totally still and then get beneath thoughts in a sense, to go to the inner center of I am, I am, right? You talk about walking. These are practices. Go for a walk. Probably do about 3 walks a day between Zoom calls just to reset. So those kinds of practices. And then the concept of like doing something uncomfortable, that's a great way to just maintain that 4% growth.
I love that practice, by the way. That's a really nice thing. And all the things that you mentioned, I just want to give one, we'll just say find your formula. And they are all sensory oriented, right? So your formula is going for a walk. Some other people's formula might be putting your feet in the grass. Some other people's formula might be something that's musical or something. There's so many different ways to get the door. Here's your entryway intuition, and that is unique to you. There's certain scents I like. I really like lemongrass. I lived in Bangkok. I think it just brings me back to a really peaceful time in my life. Do you know what I mean? So when I do the music, I tend to find the singing bowls. Like there's certain things that work for me because that's my formula. So understanding, one, the mechanics, which are universal, but 2, your formula, which is personalized, is really important. And then what you added to that, which I love, is we have a high respect for diversity, because the more experiences and diversity you put into your life, the more Lego pieces you have to create with, which is wonderful, both within your brain, but then also bringing others to the table who don't think like you, who challenge your thinking. But then actually right there on the edge of your comfort zone, wonderful things happen just on the other side of our ego, and beautiful things happen right on the edge of comfort. So we define possibility leadership, which we haven't gotten to yet, possibility leadership as setting the conditions for yourself and others to stretch what's comfortable into what's possible. And stretch is on purpose, right? Because it's right on the other side of your comfort zone, and creating the conditions by which you're allowing others to enter into that place of possibility thinking. But leadership is really bringing the weather, whether you have a positional control title to do so or not. And stretching your own comfort zone is really leading the way, right? So your practice of, I don't do the 3 things a day, though. I love that. I might take that as a challenge. One of the things I have done recently is try to put something on the table that was potentially below the surface. So if you feel a dynamic or you see something, and no one talks about those things like in a meeting, and you can just say, and it doesn't have to be confrontational, like, how do I prime for this moment to happen where we can talk about something that may not have been okay to talk about before? How do I do that? That's another really great practice. There was a situation recently. There was a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm like, okay, I just need help me understand what's happening, because I don't get it. And I want to help you, but without really understanding the dynamics of the system, so to speak. And you'd be surprised how quickly people are willing to go there. They just know and put it on the table. And it takes some nuance to be able to put the question on the table from an authentic, curious place. So as leaders, sometimes it's better to sit back and watch. We'll say, wait, why am I talking? And other times it's better to ask a really provocative, but really kind and open, curious question that gets underneath the surface. So that's another one, right? How do I help others get below this do? And
I love that. Isn't that a Brené Brown, the dare to lead? It's to dare to be vulnerable, to dare to pick up on what's subtly going on in the room or within yourself, or what you might perceive as happening with someone else. And then when you have that sort of disclosure, most people don't do it because they think you're going to think there's something wrong with me. And instead, it's been well proven, there's probably neuroscience that supports this. There's probably like plasticity that happens, and you just go, actually, people really relate to that self-disclosure. You get more intimacy, you get more connection.
Yeah, well, the safe, calm, and flexible is really where plasticity happens and learning, right? That is where we have that. So if you can't just dive at that, it really is 2-part. How do I set the stage? And picking the right time. You can't just go flopping a question on the table that's loaded and emotive. And if you don't have everybody in the right brain state, you're going to get who knows what. It's understanding the system, understanding the moment, understanding the situation, and being able to architect a really powerful, simple question that comes from an authentic, curious place. And they change the world, man. Those are magical moments. And if someone says back to you, wow, that was a really good question, then I'm usually like, stop and let that happen. and let there be some awkward silence because something magical has happened there. You touched the intuition just below the surface. And there's really cool stuff that happens at that spot.
Well, there's the unlock, the aha moment, all those things all occur. And so I think this is where you are unlocking the intuitional center. Just kind of fascinating how you're opening that up by taking the chance. Okay. So I want to layer that in. Part of, again, sort of resonated with Charlene around this. We had a conversation around this recently where you just take that chance. And this is the thing. I'll think about somebody that I haven't thought about in a while and I'll pick up on it. And then I will send them a text. I hadn't talked to them in 2 months. And, often they'll go, I was thinking about you. Or it leads to something like an update. You go, oh my God, that's just literally, where did that come from? And I think that's part of intuition. It's rather than unconscious, he calls it the non-conscious. Okay. And that's what you're doing. So in a sense, we're becoming receptive to the inner source, the subtle sort of network, if you will, right?
It's absolutely what we're doing. Michael, remember in the beginning, we said the world. So go back to the context. The world is busy. We're constantly inundated with information and external stimulus. And what we're doing is separating signal from noise.
Oh
so
my God.
When you're doing strategy, we talk about signal from noise. Messaging, we talk about signal from noise. But even in your personal being, there's a lot of noise. So being able to tap into what you're saying, like, yes, being able to access that. The answer was there all along. Right before the podcast, we briefly talked about default mode network. And I said, I'm a huge fan that there's often the answers there. There's aha moments when you're gardening or you're in the shower or you've been trying so hard to solve this problem. And all of a sudden it comes out of nowhere. And it was my first exposure to that was Ray Kaufman's work where he talks about the imagination network. And I think it was one of his very early on, I remember him saying the do much of nothing network. And I've caught on to that and really held on to it because leaders don't give themselves permission to do much of nothing. So if you can share with them that there is this whole network that fires up when you're at rest but not asleep, and in it are all of these connections, and almost everyone can go, yeah, I'll ask them, where do you get your best ideas? And they'll say, driving, in the shower, when I'm golfing, when I'm gardening, whatever that is. It is maybe it's a state of flow, right? Maybe it's a place where they can kind of get to where they're not under all these demands. And how beautiful did that feel? And yet we have created a system, a society that doesn't honor that wisdom at all. And now we're adding to that mix, and people are not equipped. They're genuinely not equipped. I would do anything for the world is to help them think more with more agency and intentionality, to be creative, adaptive, resilient. But I think the unlock, personally, and this is my personal opinion, I think the unlock is slowing down a little bit to be more intentional and to understand the rules of the game board in which we're playing, because our autopilot is going nowhere. I think that we need innovation more than we ever needed it before. And we need complex problem solving, and we need critical thinking. We need all of those things more than we needed them in our entire existence. And yet we're in autopilot, so to speak. So I'm pretty passionate about this work, it's not one thing. It's not just breathing. It is really understanding that there's a pretty simple formula for success. You asked, I think it was your fourth question, how do we scale that? And so trying to find the rules of the game, and we have the 10 principles to thrive that are based in neuroscience that you apply to think, work, lead as our framework. So how do you apply it to yourself first? Always put your own self first, no matter what role you play in the organization, and understanding your role and then bringing that to the situation. We can say team, but I'd like to say situation. It could be a meeting, could be anything collaborative, anything that's a you and me and not just me, a we, and there's a bigger we. But the way we like to think about these rules is that they apply endlessly. They apply to you, they apply to your marriage, they apply to your family, they apply to your school, they apply to your company, you know what I mean? Your team, your company, and it just kind of keeps going. Why? Because we're all human. And so if we can get to that piece, simple enough, simple but not simplistic is something Evian says a lot, and I love it. It's just, simple, there's a lot of depth there. It needs to be simple. A lot of noise in the world. So what are 2 things I can do today? 3 things what are really, really simple principles I can apply? But it's not simplistic. There's quite a bit of depth and science and research around. And all of the great people you mentioned on this podcast have played a part in that. And I think all we're trying to do is wrangle it all together and create some simple principles by which we can unlock, create agency, and bring out a better version. It's all there. It's all underneath the surface. Do you know what I mean? It's just It's just covered up by noise at this point in time. And so if we can do anything at all, it's to help people find their way through that with some agency. And if we can get some creativity to boot, even better. Right.
I mean, I like there's a diagram that you have that I've seen where for the leader, at the center, it starts with self. So this is the triad, think, work, lead. And so think is self-insight, mindset, and practice, right? And that's how you anchor that part. And you are the center of that universe in a sense. So this really, you have agency and it starts with you and it's an inside job. Then the next ring of this diagram is work. And this is where collaboration, continuous learning, and coaching and cues, questions kind of start to infect the culture in a sense with this sort of next level of openness to intuition and rational. That starts to kind of open up. It's not just outer directed. You're actually walking the walk. They're noticing that you're tuned in. You're not totally externalized. And then it goes out to the furthest ring, which is perpetuating possibility within the culture. That's almost, you've essentially been able to establish an innovational kind of ecosystem by kind of allowing, others to, you see the purpose, there's psychological safety in allowing people to just say things that might come up. Whereas heretofore, it's dangerous to have an idea, outside of your vertical within the company. Like you're fostering that safe space for an innovational culture. And what are your thoughts around that?
Absolutely. So I'll just take them one at a time if that's okay, Michael. The first one was think, and we just start with self. And so the things that we typically work on individually, and all of this can be happening at the same time, actually. Sometimes we work at different levels of the company. We're having individual coaching happening. We're having cohort conversations, and we're doing strategy work, which is really just trying to set signal and noise, like creating culture around and direction for the company. So at the individual level, we're in today's era, which we've kind of elaborated on, which is quite demanding. Let's just put it that way, demanding and changing. Then the best thing we can do is start with self-insight and reflection, giving permission to that, making that a habit, systems of thinking, which is our mindsets, and then establishing sustained practice, whatever that looks like for you, to find your formula and to remain in this place of power and agency and bring your best self to whatever situation. And then we go to work, which can be team. Sometimes we'll do teamwork, but it's also situational. It's a problem, right? It's this, we're going to create a workshop and we're going to dive into this problem. And what we focus on there is less of, there are all the skills that have always been there and the training that's there to become leaders still there. We really focused on collaboration strategies that are rooted in brain-based. For example, collaboration games. How do you create safety? How do you open, explore, and close using gamification? And how do you create safe space for people to have conversation? How do you add structure to problem solving so that we're not all trying to solve this complex problem, but you're coming at it from this angle and I'm coming at it from that angle? So just understanding how to follow our way through complexity, but together with maintaining safety and all of the things that we know about the brain. And then beginning to get better at asking questions, because it isn't a skill set. The power of inquiry is wildly appropriate and effective in this environment. And yet we honed the skill to ask really great questions, to understand the neuroscience of a great question, to understand how not to stack questions where you're asking 15 at one time because the brain can't handle that. A lot of the things we do in coaching actually applies to collaboration as well. So we work with leaders to instill that coaching as a skill, because it really is a great skill. And then as you lift up into leadership, whether that's a positional title or not, it's really then about creating at scale the ecosystem for creative performance. So that looks like really clear purpose and signal from noise. Where are we going? Why are we going there? We need the stamina to withhold this journey and the resilience to make it matter. So we'll say, let's make sure we have a clear, purposeful direction, that we've told the story. Everybody understands why it matters, what their purpose of that is. And then we can come back around and let's make sure we have psychological safety to engage in this journey. So where are we going? Does it matter to me? Do we understand it? Do I understand my role? Do we have psychological safety to engage in the game, so to speak, this metaphorical game? And then we look for the rhythms and the rituals. They're there, whether they're intentional or not is the question. When they're there, you can ask, how do we deal with failure? What happens when this happens? And we talk to people in the company, and you will find that there are rhythms. They may not be intentional. So we then come back around and put intentional practices to learn together actively. Maybe it's the third space you talked about. Do we grow together? as a team? Do we talk about our feelings? Or does that never happen? Do we have any space at all to get together and talk about what we're experiencing, personally and emotionally? And I don't mean squishy feeling. I just mean, like, do we have any space to adapt or reflect as a team or as a group? And those things typically aren't there. So we begin to create them. And those rhythms are also reinforcing to the mindsets the individuals are working on as well. So it's a bit of creating this endless ripple, right, of this synchronized, I wouldn't call it an intervention, but it's a synchronized assist. That just came out. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's to lift everyone up out of the entanglement.
Yeah. I mean, so I'm picking up on this, this idea starts in the center, it comes out to work, then it's to your culture, then, of course, to your stakeholders. I mean, it's like you're really creating a kind of ecosystem that starts to resonate with your end users, your customers. And I think this is like fascinating way to think about innovation. Innovation is something that's usually on the edge of a company, edge of the mothership. And here we are, we're talking about it. It starts right in the center and it starts to kind of come out and then goes into creating value, which is ultimately what a company's for, ultimately. Beyond making the money is about creating value in the world. Maybe like bring it to, kind of a conclusion with that, the concept of creating value through an innovational centered company.
I love that. The innovation, if you're truly thinking about that, really should be happening at all levels and areas of the business. And the ability to create possibilities is super inspiring. So whether you needed to do strategy work and there needs to be a skunk works, that's one thing, but it wouldn't hurt, I'll just put it that way, if all of the company was inspired and creative and adaptive and resilient. And that's kind of why we expanded from just innovation, where we started, to kind of a broader purpose-led effort. So I'll end with one of my favorite quotes, which is just, everything seems unclear or uncertain, anything is possible. And that's kind of where we play, I should say.
Yeah, that's a beautiful quote. I love that. One final question for you, and it seems like so obvious. When are we going to see the book? Because you have put together, all the work that you've done with Evian and all the work that you did before that to kind of even have the courage to bring possibility thinking into really the center of every company and the C-suite. You've achieved so much. And this formula, this roadmap, the nuance, the science of possibility thinking, holding the tension of science and intuition. And I think there's so many good ideas in here, and the update on mindset and so on. I can't wait to, read the book and add that to a conversation and say, Crystal Fernando's book on possibility thinking. Some great thoughts in there.
I am humbled by your confidence, and I appreciate that. Just this year, we started down that path. I think you know that. I think I'm in the process of writing a book, but I haven't said it out loud. So now I feel the need. I will feel the need to make sure that happens. But I appreciate all of it, actually. You inviting me here, allowing us to talk to the club. It's really interesting. And I hope that we can bring it to life in a book. And we'll say, to be continued. When that happens, I'll be back in front of you. How about that?
Look forward to that. Okay, thanks so much. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Next Insights podcast. If you enjoy this episode, take a screenshot and share it with a friend. And if you really love the podcast, head over to wherever you're listening and leave a rating or a review. This helps our show get in front of more people interested in shaping the future of science, technology, and consciousness. Finally, to receive even more insights on what we're discussing, thinking, and reading at Nextco Labs, sign up for our weekly newsletter by clicking the link in the show notes. I'll talk to you next week, but until then, consciously embrace disruption, my friends.